Hello and welcome to Simon Says Artwork. This is the 13th installment of Inktober and learning to draw with my left hand following an injury that I had on the 31st of September on my right hand, which is now healed. But I'm going to still try to become a lot more proficient with my left hand. Now, what I learned from yesterday's installment was that I went slow and steady and had better line work in certain areas, still a little bit wobbly and wiggly in certain parts, but it was improving. So what I'm going to do for this video is to slowly, not as slow as yesterday, but try to make just a drawing just on lines. So just to do lines across the page over and over again. And it's going to be double-sided, so I'm going to do across both pages, and I'm going to be using these three pens. So this is a let's do them in order actually. This is a 0.1 Pigma Micron pen, a 0.8 Pigma Micron, and a 1.0 Pigma Micron, which is the only one which is more of a bullet tip compared to these two, which are fine liner nibs. You can see there. Maybe you can't. I don't know. Well, the point being, they're just kind of like little blobs at the end of the metal stick, and this one isn't. This one has kind of more of a black point towards the end, and then it sticks out as a bullet tip. And it's not huge, but it is big, and it's not felt, so it doesn't flex. It's not like a brush nib. It's a bullet tip nib, which I quite like because it's much thicker and you can draw with it on the side and make a twice thickness again. But that's what I'm going to be using to make just horizontal and diagonal and vertical lines over and over again to improve upon the steadiness and my ability to be a draftsman with my left hand. That is the goal. So, okay, let's get started. Okay, so number 13, and after doing this drawing here, I'm now ready to do a bit of a departure from this dense shading in certain areas and trying to make something which is, you know, a lot more kind of almost like a Peter Draws doodle is what I was trying yesterday. So for this one I thought, no, I need to really try to do something which is going to help develop my abilities with my left hand. I really want this to be part of a training where I come out with these skills and this kind of different exercises that will build dexterity and just, I suppose, muscle memory. So just starting by pulling the pen down the page, and I must admit the pressure that I applied to these lines was far too great, and I should really ease off and try to be a little bit more loose with it, but it makes it easier for me to control the steadiness of the line. I found that if I'm not applying more pressure than is necessary, then my hand kind of wobbles a bit and wavers. Now, I don't love the fact that you can see that line there where I've just started drawing from. The previous line has breaks in the actual line as far as the ink was just didn't continue, and I don't know if that's my fault for how I drew it or if it's the pen which is slightly failing, but yeah, I don't love that. That is something where I wish it were more like what are they called, rotary pens, because they never have that issue, whereas fine liners, I've always found, doesn't matter what brand fine liner you have, there are certain marks that just go broken. You know, they just don't have a consistent ink flow. Anyway, I'm already starting to like this drawing at this point. This is where I start to see how the intersecting lines are interesting, and they're all going from the top right to the lower left. So I am conscious of the fact that I need to vary that up a little bit to make it more, I don't know, I suppose a bit more interesting, and it will help the image generally to have angles going in the other direction. But I just initially start to pull it around. That's the first line that I do, which goes in the other direction, and here we are. I've started now going from the lower right to the upper left. This I do recommend if you're doing doodles and trying this type of thing to try, is to make sure that you're aware of the direction of the lines that you're drawing. And if you're doing them all in one direction, if you're doing that consciously, then fine. But if you're not aware of the fact that, or if there's no reason behind why that's happening, and it's just what happens naturally, like when I draw, it just happens naturally that I start drawing it from one side to another or one direction. And then I start to realise that to make it interesting, they need to have conflict. They need to be overlapping and going in different directions, and that will create a different type of movement and dynamism for the viewer and just for the image. It just creates this strange tension in between the lines. Now, some of this can be horizontal and vertical lines as well, but the majority of the lines will be verticals. It's a bit of a shame that I can't flatten out the sketchbook correctly in order to have a consistent line drawn through from one page to the other. But this book is more about growth and less about being something that's suitable to have printed and sold, which is not the intention of any of these drawings. So here it is. It builds up from the lines that I've already done, and then transferring that into more rigid lines, which are verticals and horizontal lines. The reason why I think these are more rigid is because they don't give a feeling of movement. They instead feel like they are anchors, that they are solidifying the shapes. And it's what makes this drawing feel like it could be a cubist perspective drawing. It makes it change its whole structure because of the way that you draw perspective. In my knowledge, if you're not using a wide angle lens effect on your drawing, and you're doing something which is just perspective as it looks like from when you're looking at in a city or a town where there's lots of buildings or bridges, a lot of the angles will be diagonals, but then on either side the vertical lines will be straight, they won't be on a diagonal. Now, some of these aren't completely vertical, but it still has that illusion of being fairly figurative. All of a sudden it looks like things where you can start to project different objects or items into what you're seeing me draw, and there's no concept that I'm building from this. I'm not thinking, okay, the plan is to do this, because there isn't a plan. It's just to do lines and to keep drawing lines until my ability to do these is more honed than it was because of how shaky my left hand is. There's no image which these drawings are based off. There's not a reference. That's probably obvious, I'm not sure, but I just thought if I can highlight that, just so that you know I'm not looking at bridges, I'm not looking at benches, I'm not looking at anything, because that's what I kind of see immediately, but you might see something else, and if you do, I'd be curious to know what you're seeing. But I'm not drawing bridges and benches, so there's no right or wrong answer. It's all right answers. If you're seeing something, then that's what you're seeing. And that's why I'm curious to know if you do see anything. It's not just for the support on the channel, it's because I would be very interested to see what you've seen. I used to do this when I'd do a lot of hatching and show it to people, and they'd tell me what it looks like, and they'd look to me as if I was to say, yes, you're correct, you've seen it. And I'd just be fascinated with what they're seeing, because I'd say to them, I'm just drawing lines. And they'd be so confused, because I'd be saying to them, I'm not doing this on purpose, this is just practice of drawing the lines next to each other as neatly as possible, and to change directions and to try and create a bit of interest.
And I think they wanted to be validated by me saying, absolutely, you found what I was drawing. Whereas in truth, it's always just a practice of lines. That's my favourite thing. And now, because I've got this far with the 0.1 nib, it's time to bring out the bullet tip pen, which is the 1.0 nib. And again, I don't really have an idea, so I'm sort of trying things and then thinking, right, don't draw along the same line, just draw parallel to it. And maybe it doesn't have to be parallel, maybe it only has to be, somewhat close. And then I really started to struggle with some of these lines. Then I decided to cut through other lines that I'd drawn. So I was literally just trying to think, I don't know what will look right or what will work best when it comes to using this pen. I just know that I'd like to have a combination of slim and wide nibs interacting with each other. And that was the only thing which I was trying to focus on. But some of these lines really did wobble a bit more than I was comfortable with. So that's why I started to tweak them again afterwards. Now, I do think that this is what I like about this drawing, is that there is different line weights. And I think that's what makes a lot of drawings interesting. It just gives an illusion of depth. And that was the intention, is to have an illusion of depth, even though I didn't know if it would work. I thought it might just be interesting to have the weight be varied. And you can see how sometimes it just looks strange, really. But it's strange at the time as I'm drawing it, but at the end I quite like the result. And I'm glad that I didn't just draw over certain lines, that I tried to draw alongside them, parallel to them, or sometimes not even parallel. It would be oblique lines, which are lines that are on a different diagonal course, and they're a different angle. And sometimes I would draw over certain lines, but I would try not to very often. It was more a case of trying to add things as opposed to trying to heighten aspects that were already existing. But I think that, it does start to look like structures and just more interesting shapes. And it's just a shame that there are more wobbles. It's quite interesting that there's more wobbles with this pen. I don't know if it's because I wasn't taking the time that I did with the fine line nib, the first marks that I made, or whether it's because I wasn't applying the same pressure that I did. But the most important part to me now is that the marks that I added, I think, really create something which was lacking before it was there, which is certain angles and certain balances were heightened thanks to this heavier nib. And initially I thought, this could be a page where I completely cover it with lines to the point where it's just a mess and you can't tell what was there and it just looks terrible. So I was prepared to have something which was just like hatching or like scribbling or just a complete disaster. So none of this was thought through at all or expected. So as I'm drawing this, I'm kind of excited and pleased. It's like finding a piece of artwork in your house, it's like going, oh, what's this? This is interesting. And the more you draw, the more you're adding to a piece of artwork, and then you're observing it and trying to think, is that right? Is there something else that I'm missing? There's bits that I don't like as much. There's something which I think I can add here. It's strange. It's not a, calculated thing, but it is something where I try to think, how do I feel about this? Do I think there's a possibility of covering a certain space? Do I think that there's a little bit too much space in certain areas? Is there a chance that I can introduce marks in this part? And that's really what I was doing here, is thinking maybe this part here could have closer marks and this here can connect down and maybe meet up with this line. And not because of the final product, but because of what I'm seeing in the moment. And I quite like it. I think it's a very interesting thing. I am getting more and more into the abstract work, even though my goal is to try and become more proficient at figurative work. So I will be practicing from reference at some point, some anatomical drawings. One thing I've been considering, which I've not done yet, and it'd be interesting if you're watching this video to let me know what you think about the idea of live streams. Do you watch live streams, and would you watch one if I were to, to start live streaming? Because I was thinking about, this is a real-time video, but I'm drawing on my own, and I think it'd be much easier for me to draw for longer and with a different goal in mind if I had a live stream running. Now, it may be harder. The only time that I've done it before is on Instagram, and the first time that I did it, it was a disaster, but I'll talk about that another time. So my idea for live streaming is maybe having references that I can share with the audience and then talk through my thought process of selecting those references and how I approach drawing from them and what's important to me. I know a lot of artists do that, but I just think that not every artist thinks the same. I'm not going to teach how anyone else teaches, but I do love teaching what I know to anyone who's interested to learn things that I can help, or share with them, really. And I have taught a little bit here and there, and I really enjoyed the opportunities that I've had to teach people. It's rarely been paid, but when I have been paid, I've really appreciated it and tried to make sure that it's worth every moment that they are there learning with me. I'm telling them every thought that I have and showing them, not only the drawing that I'm making that I'm trying to help them emulate, but I'm also breaking down the drawing next to that into different shapes. Now this is where I have the other nib, which I believe is the 0.8 nib, and this I've decided to do vertical hatching. And the thought process here is that I like a lot of these lines in the space, but one thing that I'd like to try to take advantage of is that some of these smaller spaces could be given halftone with this type of effect, and it will again have a different it'll just create a different kind of feeling to the whole thing, because it's giving a shadow area, a shadow shape to something which is only lines. And that's something which I thought, if I do too much it won't look right, but if I do it really small and try to balance it, then it could be great. Now here I thought I'm really going to take advantage of the fact that I have this fine liner nib and try to correct this wobbly line, because that was my worst line of all of them. So I go over there, I have a much better straighter line, which is again great training for the left hand as far as I'm concerned. This is why I'm doing it. And then I thought, because I've done that, I'm now going to take advantage and do the vertical hatching on this section as well, to try to cover the wobbly line aspect of it and to continue with the theme of using this pen for this effect. And I'm glad again that I made this decision to do this with the vertical hatching. I think it really does transform this image into something that it wasn't beforehand. And I'm trying to find these smaller spaces, these little slivers of shapes in between that I think could be quite effective if given this hatching. Sorry, I'm running out of ways of describing what I mean, but I think you understand. It's kind of, once I've done it, the whole thing's different. The whole thing's completely different, because without it, it's, intersecting lines, and that's really nice because it's got the two thicknesses of lines. Without the two thicknesses, it was nice because it had the angles, but with the two thicknesses, it's now got a strange illusion of depth. And then with this hatching, it's got certain sections that are just, again, different. They're just rendered differently, and they just have this this kind of boxed out shape to them, which I find really effective. And this is what reminds me of diagrams or something like that. I think it's quite effective, and as a decision on a whim, I think it's really making this drawing a lot more interesting. Now the interesting thing is that I wasn't sure what I was going to do next, but that is exactly the shape that I looked at next. So if I were to do this drawing again, I think I'd make very similar decisions, which I would have never guessed, to be honest. But yeah, that creates balance to me. You have 3 shaded areas on each page. They're all fairly small, and they all create a different effect. And that's as far as I got. And I quite liked it. I thought this was a good drawing.
Okay, that is the drawing done. Now, what we've got is something which is, again, quite abstract, which I've done a few abstract drawings for this Inktober. You have to forgive me if you're not into that, but for me, this type of an exercise is really useful because I'm trying to get straighter and straighter lines. I think this is quite an interesting looking thing. It almost looks like a cubist approach to chairs and benches or something like that. I think it's got quite a nice look to it. I did a little bit of hatching here and there, just small amounts, just because I thought it'd be nice to have slightly thicker sections again. And I wanted to leave it there because I thought if I really keep going, I might lose what I have at this stage. But I thought it was quite interesting, and it's just something where, because it's got a lot of diagonals that go one way, go the other way, I didn't want it to look like a flag. I wanted it to have this interesting depth to it. Even though it's very flat and 2D, it still has almost a diagram looking depth, as though you're looking at instructions on how to construct something that you've purchased, like a piece of furniture. So that's where I left it for that reason. I think it's still got quite a good aesthetic quality. Now, it's not incredible work as far as, you know, how straight I can draw the lines. I could definitely learn a lot by doing more hatching, but for the time being, I'm happy that more of this type of practice will help strengthen my ability to draw with my left hand. And I am really hopeful for the end of the month. So thank you for keeping up with watching the videos, because by the end of the month, I am going to do a demonstration of how I can draw with both hands, if I can draw with both hands, which I've not practiced yet. I'm just showing you everything that I do when it comes to ink first drawings. I do other work, but I've not shown it yet. I will start uploading those after this Inktober session, because I've been doing bits of painting, bits of other drawing, but it's not ink first drawing for Inktober like this is. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, then please leave a like, comment down below, subscribe to the channel, ring that notification bell. Thank you very much for watching. Share this with any friends and family who you think might like it, and I will see you in the next video.